If you can do all your stuff, what can figure it out? That's how it chooses you.
How you been? What's going on?
Oh man, it's Sunday morning.
Yeah.
The house smells like bacon and coffee.
Shit, yes.
Got some good snuggle time in with my dog.
Oh my God, what a perfect Sunday.
Life is good. While the world burns.
While the world burns. Yes, that's right. I started talking with someone yesterday about, I had acupuncture. And she was like, how are you? And I was like, the world's ending.
Right.
She's like, yeah. And I was like, can you treat me for fascism? Is that something you can treat me for? And she's like, no, I don't know how to do that. And I was like, well, I'll just tell you what I'm feeling, and then you can treat me for that, and then you can make a note that it is the treatment for fascism. And you'll know it for the future.
I bet she thought that was funny.
She did. Yeah.
I would appreciate it if I were a doctor that patients would come in and, amuse me.
Yeah, I know. I feel like everyone appreciates it. I feel like it's the best thing I can do for the world is be amusing.
It may be the antidote, in fact, to fascism.
Maybe. Just a little bit of laughter directed at the right person at the right time. Magical.
I've been thinking about laughter a lot lately because I've been noticing that, cool people don't laugh.
Yeah.
Which, for some reason, never in my life have I noticed.
Yeah.
And I have this thing, I get really upset when people make fun of someone else's laugh.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Because I think laughter is just one of the most consistent, socially acceptable expressions of emotion.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a gift when someone laughs at what you say. And so obviously, as anyone who's ever listened knows, I'm pretty unbridled with my laughter. But I just had this realization this week where I was like, I'm never going to be cool.
Yeah.
Because I laugh when I want to.
Because you express enjoyment when things please you. Yeah, which is not something cool people do. It's true. But I'm convinced that cool people don't do it because they can't. They're just not capable of recognizing delight when it crosses their path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll choose delight over dignity any day.
Yes. Every day. All day long. Correct.
And then the other neat thing is that led me to think about you. And I'm like, Teresa laughs at my fucking jokes. She's not too cool to laugh at my jokes. And I love that about you. So it all brought it around to how much I love you.
That pleases me. As long as we keep it focused on why I'm lovable, I'm happy.
You're down.
Yep. Whatever form that comes in, I'm happy. Got up early yesterday, did a bunch of work. Got up early today to finish this. Yeah, I'm very, very excited for the story I'm going to tell you.
You seem really perky and engaged. And
it's because when I research things I actually like, if I'm just like, that seems like a cool story, but then I get into it and I'm like, boring, but then I got to still tell it. I'm like, oh God. But the ones that I actually love, I'm like, I could read about this guy forever. He's so great.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, we should tell everybody this is It Chooses You.
Oh, it is. It has chosen you today.
It has, and it has chosen you to listen to this podcast.
Uh-huh.
This is a podcast, is my point.
Yeah.
In case you didn't know.
Which you know, because you were in a podcast browsing area when you found us. Hi! Yes, and we talk about things we like.
I'm Claire Patton.
And I'm Teresa Sparks.
I forgot that part.
You forgot to name yourself?
Yeah, I usually do it right away.
You do. You've taken on that role, which I appreciate. You're like, we need a cue here to move to the next thing. I'll just introduce myself. That'll be it. We talk about things we like, which is not a particularly useful category for marketing a podcast. But we're just going to keep doing it because that's the only thing that's fun to us. And if it's not fun for us, it's not going to be fun for you.
Yeah.
So.
It's true.
Yeah.
100%.
It is broad and unnamed, the large category of things that we talk about. Sunday mornings, whenever we record, it should be all about you, Claire. It's unacceptable that I have invited another presence into this thing that we're doing.
Yeah, this isn't a podcast about other people.
It's a podcast about Claire Patton.
That's right.
That's right. Anyone
My
else?
dream come true.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else can suck it.
Yeah, you guys can all listen, but only Claire can be here. Can't be inviting other people into the recording process. Come on.
Yeah.
All right, so today I'm going to tell you about Emperor Norton I, the Emperor of America. The only emperor America has ever had. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm intrigued. I have no idea what this is.
You have no idea about this. Okay, so I will tell you how I learned about him, which is from the blessed Neil Gaiman. Buddy, if you ever hear this, I love you. You saved me in my 20s. Thank you so much. I love your brain. Good work. Okay, so
You are the best.
You are the best.
Dear Neil.
Yeah.
You're not even a national treasure. You're like a universe treasure.
Yeah, he's sent from elsewhere, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so he talked about Emperor Norton in one of the Sandman comic books.
Okay.
Toward the end. And it was sort of a piece that was a discussion. It was a philosophical discussion episode, basically, about madness and sanity. So that's where I learned about him. And I learned a lot about him after that, and then was reminded that he's amazing and really moved by his story and wanted to tell you about it today. I am going to cry. It's not a sad story. It's a beautiful story, but I'm very sensitive. And when you're sensitive and also handling your emotional stuff, happy things make you cry too. So
Go figure.
Go figure. So happy things are going to make me cry today. My sources are, of course, Wikipedia, San Francisco Chronicle, also a website I can't remember, but that's basically a collection of digitized random newspaper bits from the past. We're like, It's 1849. I want to know what was happening in San Francisco. And this newspaper place is like, here you go. Here are scans of those papers. Oh my God. Amazing. Also, KQED News did a piece on him that I used here. And Emperor Norton's Trust.
Huh.
Yeah. Which I didn't know existed until I did some research for this. So, Joshua Norton, the Emperor of the United States and the Protector of Mexico, was born in Kent in 1818 or so. Okay. He was born to merchant parents. He grew up in South Africa with them. And by the time he was a young man and decided to travel, he had already built and lost a couple businesses in South Africa. So he's a boom and bust kind of guy, moving and shaking, reasonable amount of family money, but not so much, but enough. Okay. Okay. So he, after his last business fell apart in South Africa, he decided to travel to California, and he arrived in San Francisco with the gold rushers, probably in 1849. Certainly not much earlier than that. With him, he had an estimated $40,000 left from his inheritance, and that's a historical report, so at this point I assume his parents are dead because of that. And within 3 years, he had turned it into about $250,000, or $8 million in today's money.
Sheesh.
Yeah. So very quickly, he turned himself into a prosperous and respected citizen of the city, right? He knew all the right people. He was a member of the right clubs and committees. He was invited to all the right parties. He stayed in the best hotels. He had access. He had arrived, okay? So by 1852, he is one of the premier citizens of San Francisco. And he mostly did real estate. That's how he made his money. So real estate in a boom town, right, in like between 1849 and 1853 or something, San Francisco went from having like 900 people to having 30,000 people. I mean, it was just like everyone in the world came to that area. And so yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. It's one of those in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing.
Yes.
Kicking ass, taking names.
Yes.
I don't know what that's like,
right,
personally.
I know, that's why I'm so fascinated by it.
But it sounds pretty rad.
Doesn't it sound cool? What would it be like to just be somewhere at exactly the right time instead of 10 years later than you should be? And you're looking around and you're like, 10 years ago, I really could have done something with this situation. Not Joshua Norton, buddy. He was on top of it. So a signal that he had been completely accepted by the wealthy members of San Francisco elite was that he was a member of, this is horrible, the San Francisco Committee of Vigilance. Which is exactly what it sounds like. It was a vigilante group.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. But it was a vigilante group that was formed in response to the fact that law enforcement had not grown and developed systems, etc., to enable it to be able to police 30,000 people instead of 900 people. Okay? And so they're like, well, we got to do something because people are shooting each other in the streets. So the group was originally formed to combat the Sydney Ducks gang.
What?
Yeah. I don't know if it was ducks. I don't know.
Wait, you don't know if the gang was comprised solely of mallards and Pekings?
That's right. I don't know if the gang was a gang of ducks, or it was a gang of people who raised ducks, or if ducks was someone's last name. I don't know.
I just have this image of, like, a mallard with a switchblade in my mind.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Terrorizing the citizens.
Quack, quack, motherfucker.
Yeah. And then you can never catch them because they just fly away. Yeah.
Perfect.
So the members of this committee, including Joshua Norton, felt that, quote, extra legal intervention, unquote, was necessary. Because
extra legal
intervention.
I like
it. Was literally
like
just, it was a vigilante group. It was just like a bunch of citizens. The first one had 700 people in it. And those 700 people basically deputized themselves. And they're like, this is fucked. We got to do something. And he was among them. Okay. Each of those committees dissolved after 3 months. This is not a big part of his life, but I found it really interesting, so I did a little additional research. It was formed, every committee, like, would work for 3 months and then self-dissolve, but then would form again in response to a particular kind of crime. Okay?
Okay.
And so,
wait, was it intended that it dissolve? Was that built
yes,
in? Or
yeah.
is that just, okay.
It wasn't just everybody got bored and drunk and left. Like, they intentionally dissolved after 3 months. And
right,
that, and
so
that
they
was
were
the
like,
habit.
we've cleaned up this area, or we've addressed this problem.
Murder. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So these committees existed on and off for about a decade in San Francisco and ultimately hanged 8 people and forced several elected officials to resign. So he's the kind of person who will take up arms to maintain the peace, right? Because maintaining the peace maintains the bank account, right? But I'm kind of okay with it because it's not a vigilante group in the way you would talk about it if it was based in Georgia, for example, right? Because for the most part, members of this committee only went after real assholes, and most of them were white. So there was a newspaper editor who had shot and killed another newspaper editor for publishing details about the murdering editor's criminal activity on the East Coast. They went after him, for example.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was that stuff. So when he first arrived in San Francisco, he's basically just making a bunch of money and taking names.
He was Batman.
That's right.
He was the Batman of 1850s San Francisco.
San Francisco, yes. Which he was basically just, he wore like a bat skin suit, I think is what that meant then. He basically just like all these tiny little squares of bat skin sewn together. Yeah.
Quilt.
Yeah, bat skin quilt.
Bat skin quilt.
That's right. So, okay, he's doing great. But then in late 1852, he takes some bad advice. So there was a famine in China at that time and a rice shortage. So either the rice shortage caused the famine or the famine caused people to not be able to harvest the rice. Unclear. But he was like, oh, I'm going to make a huge amount of money controlling the rice market. This is how I'm going to make my next bajillion dollars. He bought something, he bought 2 entire shipfuls of rice that had docked in San Francisco from Peru. So the rice was grown in Peru. It sailed up the West Coast and then it sailed across, right? But it sailed into San Francisco. That was the end of its journey. It wasn't there to then travel on to China. Shit. Sorry. Try that again. I got so excited I knocked my headphones out of my ear.
Got so excited talking about the rice trade.
Yeah. I'm a fan of economic history. All right. So the rice was grown in Peru and then sailed up the coast to San Francisco. And for the Peruvian farmers, that was the end of the journey. They were like, we're taking this to San Francisco and we're going to sell it. And then in San Francisco, he was like, I'm going to buy all this rice at this like deflated cost because none is coming. Like, I don't really understand economics, but anyway, He was going to make a shit ton of money, but then like 4 additional boats of rice pulled in. And he had purchased the rice at 12 cents a pound, and the additional boats meant that they were selling it at 4 cents a pound. So basically he had convinced himself, all of his money, he had convinced himself and his money had a separate consciousness that he had to negotiate with to make his deals.
Dimes, I need you to get in line. Quarters, you're doing great.
Exactly. He's out there doing little military drills with his coins. Long story short is, he and a bunch of other people went completely bankrupt because of this horrible rice venture. Okay?
Yeah.
So he pursued legal action against the company that had sold him the rice, trying to say that they knew additional ships were coming, etc., etc. So it was at trial for a really long time, but the final ruling is that he is fucked. I'm sure it said that in the court documents. You're fucked. In 1855, they ruled against him. You're fucked. It ruined him financially, and he filed for bankruptcy the next year.
Oh, man.
So, 1856, he's bust. And then history loses him for a couple years. He says he never left San Francisco. There's some debate about that. And some historical sources say that, after this misfortune, he became determinedly morose. And I think it's definitely possible to interpret determinedly morose as clinically depressed, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you grew up, you have this money, and suddenly you have nothing, and you very publicly lost everything. You went to court to fight for your everything, and you don't have it anymore.
And the vigilantes are like, dog,
They're like, we
don't want you.
We can't help you. Sorry. No crime here, just a bad investment. So after he declared bankruptcy, he became increasingly withdrawn and reclusive, and he adopted behaviors that are consistent with severe depression. He lived in a tiny room. He stopped caring about his personal cleanliness, those sort of things.
Oh my God, this sounds like me.
Yeah, he basically became us for a couple years.
The pandemic version of us.
Yeah, exactly. And it's suggested that the emperor thing was planted. He never lost friends throughout this trial, even though it was very contentious. He never lost his friends. He maintained all of his relationships throughout. And so it suggested maybe that this emperor thing was sort of planted because his friends would come by and talk over the issues of the day, because he's a very intelligent man, very successful until this horrible thing happened. And they would just say, thanks, emperor, or like call him that in a loving way. Mm-hmm. And that's where it started. So 3 years.
It could be, another thought. It could be too that it was like he was holding court, right? They would come and see him.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And he never went out, right? Because he didn't have it. So you will come to my chambers and we will discuss the issues. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Then on September 17th, 1859, he walked into every newspaper in town with a handwritten proclamation and asked that it be published. And here's what it said. At the peremptory request and desire of a large majority of the citizens of these United States, I, Joshua Norton, formerly of Aljoa Bay, Cape of Good Hope, and now for the last 9 years and 10 months past of San Francisco, California, declare and proclaim myself Emperor of these United States. And in virtue of the authority thereby in me vested, I do hereby order and direct the representatives of the different states of the Union to assemble in Musical Hall of this city on the 1st day of February next, then and there to make such alterations in the existing laws of the Union as may ameliorate the evils under which the country is laboring. Signed, Norton I, Emperor of the United States.
Okay. It's pretty great.
It is pretty great. How did the citizens of San Francisco take that proclamation, do you suppose? Huh.
They probably thought he was insane.
Huh. What's this guy saying? Huh. Okay, well, first you got to know no one showed up on February 1st at Musical Hall. He went and he waited and no one showed up. And he's like, okay, well, I guess, maybe I'll try and... Oh, no, it's bone time again. God damn it, you guys. Stop. Please cut that out. The world doesn't need to know I call it bone time when my dogs are chewing bones.
Well, now, see, I would have cut it out, but then you were funny. If you want me to cut things out,
Be boring.
quit being funny.
Be
Yeah.
boring? Sure.
I will cut that out.
You don't have to. You can leave it. I don't care.
No, I want to leave it.
Leave it, then it's fine. So whatever else the citizens of San Francisco thought about him, they also loved him. And I know that for sure from the history. So city directories were just being published. That was just becoming a thing, especially on the West Coast. Not enough people to really require it, like a phone book, you know? So it's possible, starting with his trial, to like chart a downward financial spiral by looking at the addresses of like increasingly seedy hotels he was staying in.
Right.
But in the same directory, in 1862, which was only 3 years after his first proclamation, proclaiming that he was the Emperor of the United States, we find the following listing in the city directory. Norton, Joshua, Emperor, dwelling, Metropolitan Hotel. That's it. It took San Francisco 3 years to say, oh, he wants to be the emperor? Okay. And then just everyone called him emperor. He spent his days inspecting San Francisco's streets in an elaborate blue uniform with gold epaulets.
Wow.
He was given the uniform by officers of the United States Army in the Presidio. He wore a beaver hat that he couldn't afford, decorated with peacock feather and a rosette, and usually had a cane or umbrella too. Very like imperial presence, right? During his inspections of the city, he would examine the condition of sidewalks and cable cars, the state of repair of public property, the appearance of the police officers. He would also frequently give lengthy philosophical expositions on a variety of topics to anyone within earshot. He would just wander the city, making sure it was looking good, taking notes about things he needed to tell the city mayor, you know, and having philosophical conversations with everyone who was willing to listen to him. He just out in the world, like a man of the city in a real way. So,
and everybody knew him.
Everybody knew him, yeah. So he made money by charging people. So there are lots of different ways he made money. Much later, like in the 1870s, he made money by like taking some change to have to sign something for a tourist. Or even later, I think he actually had his photo taken with tourists a couple of times, because the end of his life like coincided with the development of photography, you know, more accessible photography. He would charge people a fine if they called San Francisco Frisco. He insisted that it was the city of St. Francis and should be called that with respect, San Francisco. Whoever, after due and proper warning, shall be heard to utter the abominable word Frisco, which has no linguistic or other warrant, shall be deemed guilty of a high misdemeanor and shall pay the imperial treasury a penalty in the sum of $25.
Which, hey, $25 was a lot of money back then.
Not insignificant. That's how seriously he took it, right? And there's something for me about St. Francis. I'm not a Catholic, but he's always been one of my faves. Like, I love...
He's the fuzziest saint.
He talks to animals, protects them, you know, wonderful, whatever. And so there's something really wonderful and, like, appropriate that he is going through this kind of insanity in San Francisco. And you'll see more about why, I think, a little later. Okay. He was so loved by people in the city, actually, that restaurants would let him eat a full lunch for 5 cents, as long as he allowed them to post a notice on their wall that they were a restaurant favored by the emperor. We're like, you can
endorsements.
Mm-hmm. You can come and have a cheap lunch as long as we get to put a plaque up saying you eat here. Okay?
It's so great.
He went to libraries and read books. He walked with various citizens low and high, discussing the issues of the day. He had tea in cafes. He was a loved public presence. So much so that when his uniform began to look shabby, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors bought him a new one. Here you go. You're looking a little dirty there, bud. Here, have a new uniform. Okay, so the other thing he did as emperor, of course, was make proclamations. He was really good at making proclamations. Okay, and the local newspapers published all of them. They published all of his and then made some up, even, you know, but they published his. So in 1859, He proclaimed that Governor Wise of Virginia should be removed from office for hanging John Brown, and he appointed the governor of Kentucky to replace him. Right? How amazing.
Can we do that? Speaking of Kentucky, can I declare myself emperor and just send Mitch McConnell to some like level of hell or something? And
GTFO, Demon Turtle.
That's right.
In 1860, he dissolved the United States of America. I mean, needless to say, no one in positions of actual power and authority in the country are taking notice of this guy.
Right.
But there's just something so wonderful that the newspapers are like, ooh, Emperor Norton's got something. Let's get it in the paper today, you know? I just love that.
Yeah. Do you know why he dissolved the United States of America?
Yeah, his reasoning, it seems to be, is that, well, since we're fighting a lot, right? Southern states and the northern states are fighting. The war wasn't official at that point, I don't think. 1860? No, I don't think so. 1861 is when it was declared. So there was just a lot of tension, and his response was, well, if I was in charge, there wouldn't be tension because I'm such a good leader and I understand everybody, and all people need is to be understood, right? So I could definitely help this situation. So I'm going to dissolve the United States, and I'm going to be the emperor, and that's how we're going to resolve these tensions. He, before the war and during the war, he would alternate between a blue and a gray uniform because he didn't want to take sides.
Oh.
And that's one through line of all of this, is like, he wasn't emperor to make himself rich, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't emperor to be famous. Like, those are all secondary. He was emperor because he was concerned about the welfare of his citizens. You know? So wonderful. So he proclaimed a ton of, like, every couple of months he had a new one, right? The city's news.
Sorry, you said the newspaper would print them?
Oh yeah, the newspapers published all of his proclamations. And if he only gave it to one, the rest of them would publish it the next day. So the particular readerships would know that there was a new missive from the emperor that they needed to attend to, right? So because people were so interested in him and loved him, newspapers started publishing fake proclamations to gain readership. And he was like, no. And so in 1870, he started publishing his proclamations almost exclusively in an African-American owned and operated abolitionist weekly called the Pacific Appeal.
Wow.
There, he proclaimed that because colored people had been made citizens, they and their children were due all the privileges of citizenship, including riding streetcars and attending public school. He spoke out publicly against anti-Chinese sentiment in San Francisco, once at a rally of anti-Chinese assholes, basically. He was like, everybody needs to go home. This is not okay. He stood up and, like, took over the rally, and he was like, no, don't do it. Go home. And nobody listened to him. And the rally went on. But he stood up publicly at a time when nobody would. He said, let it be known that the eyes of the emperor will be on anyone who shall counsel any outrage or wrong on the Chinese. Like, that's it. He proclaimed that a square... Well, so those are the great things, right? But he was crazy, okay? He did have some issues. So he also proclaimed that a square in town in San Francisco should be made, like, created, buildings demolished to make a square so that fruit and vegetable sellers wouldn't be so crowded together in the street where they all sold. He essentially proclaimed a farmer's market.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say. That's so San Francisco.
He proclaimed also that a little girl in Oakland should be free not to play hide and seek when she didn't want to. Apparently in response to a letter she wrote him asking for help. Because friends of her friends were always making her play hide and seek, and she hated it. Right?
So he was lofty, but he was also not. You know, he was in touch with individuals as well. He
wasn't... I mean, and partially, like, if we look at it practically, we can say he probably smelled. He was wearing one set of very dirty clothes. You know, he lived in a tiny room. It was probably dirty. And so he's not going to spend a lot of time in the places he used to frequent, right? The fanciest are not going to let him hang out there. But his business friends were still giving him enough money to live. Like, he lived for 30 years or something, and he never begged. He always just did these emperor-related tasks, you know? And so His business friends, they speculate that they were still giving him money to sort of maintain himself in some way. But yeah, so from a practical standpoint, he probably couldn't hang out with the highest anymore. But through a slightly different lens, in the same practical view, he actually cared equally about everybody. He was like, the concerns of the people who sell fruit and vegetables in my town are just as important to me as he was writing letters to Queen Victoria. I mean, he was writing letters to heads of state in Europe, and that's
his diplomatic duty.
That's exactly right. It is necessary for me to be available to other heads of state that we might maintain a friendly relationship. Blah, 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 blah. On that note, he also issued a proclamation instructing people to form a League of Nations. I mean, he was basically like prophetic in some ways. He declared that the League of Nations should be created. He forbade any form of conflict between religious sects. In 1872, he decreed the construction of a suspension bridge connecting Oakland and San Francisco. The Golden Gate Bridge was completed in 1936, but 60 years before that, he was like, you know what we should do?
Wow.
We need a bridge here. Yeah. Only once was he arrested. In 1867, a newly appointed, young, zealous, private security guard. Neighborhoods would club together to hire private security forces because the vigilante thing was still happening a little bit now. There weren't enough law enforcement officers for the wealthy of the city to be completely comfortable. So they hired their own private forces, as they do now, right?
All right.
So, new guy on the squad of this particular neighborhood apprehended Emperor Norton I of the U.S. and took him before the Commissioner of Lunacy for involuntary treatment for a mental disorder. He's like, we need to get you off the streets. The arrest so outraged the citizens of San Francisco that it sparked numerous scathing editorials in the newspapers, including one which wrote, "He had shed no blood, he has robbed no one, and despoiled no country, which is more than can be said of most of the fellows in that line. He needs to be released."
Yeah.
The chief of police ordered him released immediately and issued a formal apology to him on behalf of the police force.
Oh, damn.
Police officers of San Francisco thereafter saluted him when they passed him in the street.
Oh.
Exactly. It makes me so happy. It makes me so happy. Okay.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Like, okay. Obviously, something's going on mentally, but he's functioning. He's not only functioning, he's contributing to his community.
Yes. Yes.
So leave him the fuck alone.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. By 1870, the U.S. Census, so not just a local phone book, but the U.S. Census lists Joshua Norton as 50 years old, residing at 624 Commercial Street, and his occupation is listed as emperor.
Yes! Oh, yes.
The census report, unfortunately, also notes that he was insane.
Well, it's honest.
Yeah. So this question of insanity, this is where it is. Like, how insane was he? Because he was completely capable of interacting in a normal way most of the time, except around this particular belief.
Right.
Right? So his history says evidence appears to be entirely in favor of the sincerity of his belief. So he wasn't putting it on. He actually believed he was emperor, right? At the time of his financial disaster, he was only 35. And he had great abilities in business. He may have regained his fortune or created a new one in the rest of his life. But that single twisted convolution, this report says, lay uppermost in his mind. And for 23 years, he was completely dominated by it. Poor, sometimes soiled and shabby, pathetic and philosophic, but always with a noble mind, he bore himself with dignity amid his squalid surroundings with one fixed and unvarying purpose, and that was consistently the welfare of his people. The heritage of honor and integrity that he had handed down while in his affluence, right, was never squandered or dissipated, and so he bore the respect and goodwill of the best of his people to the very end of his life. The jokes played on him were mostly harmless, and all of the merriment that he sometimes excited had been without any kind of venom or ridicule. And now's where I'm going to start crying. So, on January 8th, 1880, the Call printed his obit. So, here it is. Last night at 8:15, Joshua Norton, universally known as Emperor Norton, died suddenly in this city. The similar death of the first citizen of San Francisco or the highest municipal officer of the city would not have caused so general a sensation as that of the harmless old man, whose monomania never distorted a heart which was wholesome, and hardly affected a mind which had once been one of the shrewdest. On the reeking pavement, in the darkness of a moonless night under the dripping rain, and surrounded by a hastily gathered crowd of wondering strangers, Norton I, by the grace of God, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico, departed this life. Other sovereigns have died with no more of kindly care. Other sovereigns have died as they have lived with all the pomp of earthly majesty. But death having touched them, Norton I rises up the exact peer of the haughtiest king or Kaiser that ever wore a crown. Through his harmless proclamations can always be traced an innate gentleness of heart.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And that's not the whole quote, because as we discussed, but you guys didn't get to hear, because it was a whole thing, the language this is written in is like, it seems to me deliberately trying to not make you feel.
Yeah. So Teresa did some editing there and cut a few things out. But
so I cut down to the things that made me.
I think they're unfortunate that you were not their editor at the time. It's much better now.
Oh, so details of Norton's life may have been forgotten, but he was immortalized in literature because Mark Twain lived in San Francisco during part of Emperor Norton's public life. And he modeled the character of the king in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn after Emperor Norton. And Robert Louis Stevenson made Norton a character in his 1892 novel The Wrecker. And Stephen's stepdaughter mentioned Norton in her autobiography. She said, "He was a gentle and kindly man, and fortunately found himself in the friendliest and most sentimental city in the world." The idea being, let him be emperor if he wants to. San Francisco played the game with him, she said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's something I was thinking about as you were telling the story is, that's something I could see happening now in a place like San Francisco. And Boulder's a little like this, and Portland's a little, it tends to be these progressive cities where there are these characters, right? Mm-hmm. They're usually a little down on their luck in some manner. Sometimes they have perhaps some issues, but there is a sense of not only tolerance, but like embracing the odd characters. And I don't know, it's really interesting that happened so early in San Francisco's history. And it indicates to me that perhaps there was that character that I would associate with San Francisco now, that character of sort of embracing its weirdos, I guess, was already in place. Yeah, that's interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, and it could be that sort of the willingness to tolerate loud but harmless mental difficulties.
Yeah.
It could be that it's actually more likely that you'll note and understand and leave harmlessness alone if you live in an environment where people are trying to kill each other in the street.
Yeah.
Like if you've watched someone get shot outside of a saloon this morning, someone who says he's emperor but is only doing good things in the community, you're like, yeah, that's okay. Like, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he suffered this psychological break, but harnessed his neurosis became of benefit to his community.
Yeah.
Which is just really compelling.
Yeah. So there's a poem that was sort of written after his death, and we can include this or not. I'm happy to end with the quote from Stevenson's stepdaughter or whatever. But And it's drivel. This poem is horrible. But the last 2 stanzas are actually, relatively, it's the right sentiment anyway. They ended on the right thing. So this poem that was written after his death, like 20 years after his death, this poem concludes, "No long and weary struggle with pain, one sudden throw in his clouded brain closed forever his bloodless reign, with every man his friend. For death alone did he abdicate. What emperor, prince, or potentate can long avoid a similar fate, or win a better end?" Isn't that sweet?
Yeah.
I just love it. When they arrested him, they're like, "Hey man, he's done so much less harm than all the other emperors out there. Let him out of jail right now. What the hell's wrong with you?" And then the police chief is like, "I'm so sorry." Like bows at him in the street. "My apologies." Oh, it's so great. That is the story of the only emperor of the United States, Joshua Norton.
That's wonderful. What a delight, Teresa.
Thank you.
Thank you for telling me that story.
You are welcome.
Do you know where the Protector of Mexico piece came from?
I do, yeah. Shortly after he went crazy, Napoleon III invaded Mexico, and someone was like, "Someone should protect them," and he's like, "Bing!"
I'm on it.
Bing! Yeah.
San Francisco Batman's on the case.
Yeah. I mean, of course, the thing he did to protect them was call himself their protector and nothing else. Right. But, the impulse is right? We can judge the efficacy of the efforts. Efficacy of the efforts is horrible, but we can judge.
Well, no, I thought that was pretty good.
Oh,
but
did
go
you?
Ahead.
Oh,
yeah. Say it the way you want to say it.
No, that's one of the things I like about you is that when I'm like, that was shit, you're like, no, that's okay. I love that.
No, it was efficacious.
I'm only allowed to use words that have that root. I have to try and say this, and I only have that idea to say it with in just a bunch of different forms. F. Yeah, exactly. F. In fact, from now on, when I say F this, that's what I mean.
Efficacious this.
Efficacious this, man. Effort this.
Oh my goodness, what a wonderful story.
I'm glad you liked it.
That was heartwarming.
I know.
Thank you for warming my heart on this sketchy Sunday morning.
Yeah, you are welcome. I am happy to warm your heart whenever it is cold.
I believe it would be in the cockles region of my heart that I'm feeling the most warmth.
What is that, Dennis Leary? Oh my god. Did you just Dennis Leary that, or are you making the same joke?
I just said, I think I'm just making the same joke. I don't know
That's
Dennis
awesome.
Leary too well.
Dennis Leary.
His stand-up
/ music, yes. He did a whole thing about the cockle.
Oh, really?
Yeah. What is that? Yeah.
What is it?
I don't know.
What the fuck? Everybody, itchoosesyou podcast@gmail.com. Please email us and tell us what the fuck a cockle is.
It's a shellfish.
Yeah. But I wonder if maybe there's a part of anatomically of the heart that resembles a shellfish?
Maybe.
Let's make something up.
Or cockle is like rhyming slang for something.
Yeah.
We need a...
Cockle.
I'm sorry, did you say cockle was rhyming slang for hockle?
Yes!
Okay.
Oh, that yes was painful.
Yeah.
Like, it was painful.
It was an admission. Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
It sucked.
I did.
I'm sorry, everybody.
Why you gotta point it out? Jesus.
I feel like the number one rule of podcasting is to end your podcast with an apology.
Oh, really?
No.
Oh.
Not really.
I was like, what?
I just apologized and then was like, oh, that's a great way to end your podcast.
I felt betrayed that you were actually researching how to do this. We don't need to know how to do this. Don't do research about that.
Anytime everybody, anytime I say something about a rule of podcasting, it's because I think whatever I'm about to say is ridiculous.
Mm. Okay. Let me add that to what I know of you.
Yeah. Put it in the Claire book.
Yeah, let me just put it in the Claire book. We need a better name for that, but like it's essentially a playbook of how it is to be your friend, right?
Yeah, we definitely need a better name for that. I'll think about it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I know, but I think for the future we should absolutely just end every episode of this podcast with an apology. Sorry, everybody. See you next week.
Sorry. And
Yeah.
see.
So we have been Claire and Teresa. We are always Claire and Teresa, but specifically in the last hour or so, we have definitely been Claire and Teresa.
Yeah, we've been like 10% more Claire and Teresa than usual. And this, for the last hour and whatever, has been It Chooses You.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much.
We will see you again next week.
Yay!
Okay, bye.
Testing. Great. Thank you for listening to It Chooses You. Your hosts are Teresa Sparks and Claire Patton. Our theme song is by Bobby Dart. If you'd like to get in touch with us, drop us an email at itchoosesyoupodcast@gmail.com.